السلام عليك يا سيدي يا حبيبي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا رحمة للعالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh to Maulana and to all the participants. Welcome to tonight's session, and without further ado, I'm handing over to Maulana inshallah to continue with the class. Ameen.
Jazakallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. Huwa al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin wa huwa bikulli shay'in alim. Amma ba'd, fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون. صدق الله العظيم. صلى الله على النبي الأمي وآله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Salatu wa salamun alayka ya Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. My dear viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our cherisher and our sustainer, and choices of durood and salam be upon his beloved, our master, arwahuna fida Sayyidina Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. When we look at the life of Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, Sayyidina Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala an, we will find that his entire life was a reflection of the status and the maqam of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Every aspect of his life, every attribute of his life, it was a reflection and it was a manifestation of the shan of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Whether you look at his character, whether you look at his knowledge, whether you look at his spiritual devotion, whether you look at his practices, whether you look at his spiritual striving, every aspect you will find a reflection of the shan of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And this is why Sayyidi Ala Hazrat says, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ كَهَ سَايَا تُجْ پَر وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ كَهَ سَايَا تُجْ پَر بول بالا ہے تیرا ذکر ہے اونچا تیرا. Because this verse, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ, was revealed purely for the praise of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, his explicit praise and honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted to him, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, "O my beloved, we have raised for you your remembrance." And everyone and anyone who annihilates themselves in the love of Allah and his Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam and becomes fana fir Rasul, they annihilate themselves in the remembrance of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, then you will find that that person becomes shadowed by وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ also. That is why Allah says, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ كَهَ سَايَا تُجْ پَر بول بالا ہے تیرا ذکر ہے اونچا تیرا. This is the manqabat of Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, because he became annihilated in the love of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam to such an extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shadowed him by وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ, and even his remembrance has become elevated. And this is why we find that in every corner of the world you will find the remembrance of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And we will find in every corner of the world the remembrance of Huzur Ghaus-e Azam Sayyidina Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala an. Now, in today's topic, I want to focus a bit on the reflection and the manifestation in Huzur Ghaus-e Azam of the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Because the aspect which elevates a person the most is the aspect of knowledge. So any person, the more knowledge they have, the more elevated the maqam becomes. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Say, are those who know equal to those who don't know? And this is a rhetorical question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks in the Holy Quran, emphasizing that those who know cannot be equal to those who don't know. And the more knowledge a person has, the more their maqam becomes elevated. And this is that attribute through which a person gains most honor in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why we find that Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam's maqam is so elevated, and the thing that elevates his maqam the most from all of his attributes is his attribute of his knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no creation of Allah that has more knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. And even in the era of Huzur Ghaus Azam, there was no one that had more knowledge of the deen, that had more knowledge of the Sharia than Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an. Now, if you look at the knowledge of Huzur Ghaus Azam, of the Holy Quran, of the Hadith, of fiqh, of the various sciences of Hadith, etc., you will find that he was matchless in his era. You find even in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, obviously he brought the deen to the Sahaba Ikram, and no one understood the Holy Quran better than Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. And the various interpretations, with the various meanings, etc., of the verses, when the Sahaba Ikram did not understand it in context, Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam used to explain it to them. And in the same way, in the time of Huzur Ghaus Azam, no one had more knowledge of the Holy Quran than Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala an. It is mentioned that Hazrat Hafiz Abdul Abbas Ahmad, he once attended the gathering of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala together with Shaykh Jamaluddin ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayh. And this Shaykh, he narrates himself, and he says that when he went into the gathering of Huzur Ghaus Azam, as usual in the gathering, the Qari, he recited a verse of the Holy Quran, and when he recited the verse, then Huzur Ghaus Azam proceeded to explain the verse and give the interpretation of that verse. So Shaykh Abul Abbas Ahmad, he then asked Shaykh Jamaluddin, are you aware of this interpretation of this verse? And Shaykh Jamaluddin replied, yes, I am aware of this interpretation. Huzur Ghaus Azam then proceeded to explain another interpretation of the same verse. So the Shaykh again asked Shaykh Jamaluddin, are you aware of this interpretation? And Shaykh Jamaluddin replies, yes, I am aware of this interpretation as well. And then Huzur Ghaus Azam proceeds to give another interpretation. And each time Huzur Ghaus Azam gave an interpretation, explained to the gathering another interpretation of the same verse of the Holy Quran, each time that Shaykh, he asked Shaykh Jamaluddin, are you aware of this interpretation? And each time that Shaykh would say, yes, I am aware of this interpretation, until Hazrat Ghaus Pak had reached 11 different interpretations that he had explained to the gathering. And all 11 of those Shaykh Jamaluddin was aware of. And thereafter, Huzur Ghaus Azam continued and gave a 12th explanation, 13th explanation. And after that, from the 12th explanation onwards, every time the Shaykh asked Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala, every time the Shaykh asked Shaykh Jamaluddin radiyallahu ta'ala an, are you aware of this interpretation? Then that Shaykh would say, no, I am not familiar with this interpretation of this verse. And this continued from the 12th interpretation until Huzur Ghaus Azam one by one continued to give interpretation until he had reached 40 different interpretations of the Holy Quran, of that verse of the Holy Quran. And Shaykh Jamaluddin was astounded by the knowledge of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala an, that even though he had knowledge of 11 different interpretations of that one verse of the Holy Quran, he could not understand the extent of the knowledge of Huzur Ghaus Azam, that Huzur Ghaus Azam explained 40 different interpretations of the same verse. Subhanallah. So this is the extent of the knowledge of Huzur Ghaus Azam of the Holy Quran. So this is what we learn from the life of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala, that there was no one that had more knowledge of the Sharia, no one that had more knowledge of the Holy Quran than Huzur Ghaus Azam in his era, in his time. So this is one example in terms of his knowledge of the Holy Quran. In terms of him being a faqih, in terms of him being one who gave fatwas, in terms of him being a mufti, there was no one in his era that was more knowledgeable on the knowledge of Quran and Hadith and on the various masail, and in terms of giving rulings with regard to matters that arose in that era. And the people of the Arab world, when they would fail in their respective regions in terms of getting an answer, then they would come to Huzur Ghaus Azam radiyallahu ta'ala an, and they would immediately receive an answer. And it is mentioned that the scholars, the muftis of that time, were astounded at the speed with which Huzur Ghaus-e Azam would give an answer. So if someone came to ask Huzur Ghaus-e Azam for a fatwa on any matter, then Huzur Ghaus-e Azam would not refer the matter to the next day or ask for some time to ponder over the matter or to research the answer. The scholars of that time say that as soon as a question was posed to Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, then he would immediately give the response, and he would always give a written response to the questioners. And the scholars of that time were amazed at this, firstly, the speed, and secondly, when he used to give an answer, they used to be amazed at the depth of the answer that he used to give and the wisdom with which he used to give answers to the people that questioned him. And in the slide, it is mentioned that there was a person from Persia who had a predicament due to a vow that he had taken, due to an oath that he had taken. And in this oath, he actually took a vow to his wife. And he said that 3 talaq is upon his wife if he is unable to perform such an ibadat that when he performed that ibadat, there is no one in the entire face of the earth that is performing that the same ibadat at the same time with him. So this was the vow he made. So 3 talaqs upon his wife if he fails to perform such an ibadat that someone somewhere on the face of the earth is not performing the same thing at the same time. And he posed this question to many of the scholars, the muftis of the Arab and the Persian regions, and no one was able to give him an answer. Everyone said they were perplexed. They said there's no way out for him to save his marriage. And eventually people directed him and said, if there's anyone that could give him an answer, it would be Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala an. So eventually he came to Baghdad, and he came to Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, and he posed this question, his predicament of his marriage being destroyed because of this oath that he had taken. And Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, immediately when he heard the question, he immediately wrote the answer without asking for time to ponder over it, without asking for time to research it, without asking for time to think about it, even though all of the scholars in the entire Arab and Persian regions were unable to find an answer for him, to find a solution to his problem. Huzur Ghaus-e Azam immediately was able to give him the solution to his problem. Because remember, this is such an intricate question. In order for someone to be not performing the same ibadat somewhere in the world, this is close to impossible. Why? Because if someone is performing azan where you are, then somewhere in the world there's somebody else that is performing azan. If somebody is reciting the Holy Quran, then somewhere else in the world someone is performing recitation of the Holy Quran, making tilawat. If someone is performing salah, then somewhere else in the world somebody could be performing salah. If somebody is fasting, somewhere else in the world people could be fasting. If somebody is performing umrah, then there's thousands and millions these days of people performing umrah at the same time. So any ibadat, even if you give charity, there's somewhere out in the world, somewhere that other people could be doing the same thing. So posing this kind of a question, this is why none of the other scholars could provide an answer for him, because no one could see how he could perform such an ibadat that somewhere in the world somebody else is not doing at the same time. But when the question came to Huzur Ghaus-e Azam, he immediately wrote down the answer, and he said to him that he needs to go to Makkatul Mukarramah, he needs to go to the Holy Kaaba, and he needs to clear out the mataf. And after clearing out the mataf, he needs to perform the tawaf of the Holy Kaaba. And Huzur Ghaus-e Azam said this is how his oath will be discharged, because once the mataf is cleared out and he is the only person making tawaf, then on the entire face of the earth there's no one else making the ibadat of tawaf of the Holy Kaaba apart from him, because that is the only place that a person can be making the tawaf of the Holy Kaaba. And if the entire mataf is cleared out and he's the only person performing the tawaf, then his vow, his oath would have been fulfilled and his marriage would have been saved. And it is mentioned that that person did not even wait that night to stay over at Baghdad. He immediately left to travel towards Makkah al-Mukarramah. Subhanallah. So this is the knowledge, this is the wisdom of Huzur Ghaus-e Azam radiyallahu ta'ala an, that this is how he solved people's problems that none of the other ulama, the mashayikh of that time, could solve for people. And it is mentioned that even his students, those scholars, those muftis that had studied under Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an, their knowledge was so vast that even in their localities, there was no one more knowledgeable on the matters of deen in their localities than the students of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an. So again, we can see that his faizan was so widespread that all of those students that studied under him also became blessed with so much and such immense knowledge of the deen, of the Sharia, that they became stalwarts in their own regions with regard to Sharia and with regard to giving rulings with regard to the jurisprudence, the fiqh. So this is the shan of Huzur Ghaus Azam in terms of his knowledge. And then we look at the sermons that Huzur Ghaus Azam used to deliver. Now, if you look at the entire life of Huzur Ghaus Azam, then one thing that we find in particular that stands out in his life is the aspect of knowledge. Because Huzur Ghaus Azam, from the age of approximately 4.5 years old, he started his journey of knowledge. And till the time that he passed away from this dunya, he was still on that journey of knowledge. And the first half of his life, approximately till the age of 50, he was journeying on the path of learning and seeking the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge of Shariat, etc. So he spent approximately 45 years seeking knowledge of the Sharia, seeking knowledge of tariqat, seeking knowledge of ma'rifat, and gaining the closeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all types of knowledge, ruhani and theoretical, practical knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he spent approximately 45 years attaining that. And then he spent the next 40 years of his life dispensing that knowledge. Subhanallah. So, when we say that we love Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an, then we need to understand that his life revolved around knowledge. His entire life was spent in either learning and attaining or in dispensing knowledge. So when we say we love Huzur Ghaus Azam, then we need to follow in those footsteps, and we need to also make an attempt to seek knowledge and to dispense knowledge. We need to try to learn about the Sharia, try to learn about those things that are farz on us to learn. Today we have become so engrossed in the dunya, we don't have time for deen, we don't have time to seek knowledge. But then we say we love Huzur Ghaus Azam. If we love Huzur Ghaus Azam, then we need to follow the teachings of Huzur Ghaus Azam. We need to follow the footsteps of Huzur Ghaus Azam. And we need to follow this beautiful example that his entire life gives us about the importance and the significance of knowledge in our lives. So his first half of his life was spent in seeking knowledge, and the second half of his life was spent in dispensing that knowledge. And it is mentioned that while he used to give, initially when he started giving discourses, delivering sermons, then he used to use the madrasa of his Pir Murshid, Hazrat Abu Sa'id al-Mubarak al-Makhzumi radiyallahu ta'ala an. And this is that personality about whom Huzur Ghaus Azam himself says that the day that my Murshid entered me into being his disciple, made me his murid, then after making me his murid, he gave me a meal to eat with his own hands. And Huzur Ghaus Azam says about the blessings of that meal, and he says that every morsel of food that my Murshid put into my mouth, he says, my heart began to illuminate with the nur of the ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah. What will you understand the shan of the Murshid of Huzur Ghaus Azam, and what will you understand the shan of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an? And he says that after my Murshid, he gave me these morsels of food to eat, he fed me with his own hands. Thereafter, he put onto me and he made me wear the garb of wilayat, the garb of sainthood, the khirqa of wilayat. And he said to Huzur Ghaus Azam that this is that garb, this is that khirqa, this is that cloak that Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam had given to Mawla Ali radiallahu ta'ala an. Mawla Ali then passed this on down to Khaja Hasan Basri radiallahu ta'ala an. And from Khaja Hasan Basri, it got passed down generations to generations until it reached Hazrat Abu Sa'id Mubarak al-Makhzumi radiallahu ta'ala an. He then put it on to Huzur Ghaus Azam. And it is stated that once Huzur Ghaus Azam wore this khirqa of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, that Nur could be seen descending upon Huzur Ghaus Azam. Subhanallah. So this is the shan of Huzur Ghaus Azam, and this is the shan of his Pir o Murshid. And he says that initially when he started giving the sermons, delivering the discourses, he started delivering it in the madrasa of his Pir o Murshid. And in a very short space of time, that madrasa became full, because people from all parts of the world, they started to attend his gatherings because they could see the faizan that was being distributed from the blessed lips of Huzur Ghaus Azam. So people from far and wide used to come to attend the discourses of Huzur Ghaus Azam. And eventually there were various homes around, various properties around the madrasa that were bought and encompassed and incorporated into the madrasa to expand the madrasa. But even after some time, even this became full, and people used to be seated on the streets and the gullies in order to listen to the discourses of Huzur Ghaus Azam. And eventually, Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala's mimbar was taken by his murids. They took his mimbar, his pulpit, and they went and placed it on an open field, and that became his new place where he used to give his discourses from. And it is mentioned that approximately 70,000 people used to attend his gatherings to listen to his discourses. Subhanallah. This is the shan of Huzur Ghaus Azam, that his discourses became so wide that people from the entire world started coming, and roughly 70,000 people at a time used to attend his gatherings. And not only the people, the insan, the humans, but it is mentioned that even the jinnat used to attend his gatherings, even the rijalul ghaib, the men of the unseen, used to attend his gatherings. Such was the maqam of Huzur Ghaus Azam, and such was the maqam of his dispensation of knowledge. And in these gatherings, it is mentioned that there were numerous people that were dedicated only to recording the words of Huzur Ghaus Azam. And this is why you would find that today there are many kitabs that are available with the discourses of Huzur Ghaus Azam that was recorded by many of the people of that time in his gatherings. And it is mentioned that his gatherings were so powerful in terms of ruhaniyat, in terms of spirituality, that some people used to pass away just listening to his discourses. Some people used to become so engrossed in the ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they used to fall down unconscious. Some of them used to tear off their clothes and start crying uncontrollably. And some people used to repent in his gatherings. Some people used to even bring iman in his gatherings. His gatherings wasn't just for the Muslims, even non-Muslims used to attend his gatherings. And many non-Muslims, they just by listening to the discourse of Huzur Ghaus Azam, they accepted Islam. In fact, it is mentioned that there was a Christian monk that once attended from Yemen, and he came in the gathering of Huzur Ghaus Azam. After listening to his discourse, he accepted Islam, and he then stood up and he said to the people that, "O people of Baghdad, I am a Christian monk and I am from Yemen." And he said that for a long time now I had realized the truth of Islam, and I realized that Islam is the true religion, but I had refrained from accepting Islam, and I made the vow that I will not accept Islam until I come across such a person who was the most pious amongst the people of this time. Because he said, the reason I delayed accepting Islam, because when I looked at the condition of the present day Muslims, meaning that present time, I did not find it befitting when I looked at what their conduct was compared to what the religion was actually saying. So he made this vow that he will not accept Islam until he comes across the most pious person of that time. And he says after he made this vow, sometime later he had a dream in which he saw Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. And he says Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam then said to him, this person's name was Sanan. So Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam in the dream said to him, "O Sanan, go to Baghdad and accept Islam at the hands of Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani." And Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam said to him that in this present era, there is no one who is more strict on the Sharia, there is no one who is more knowledgeable on the Sharia, and there is no one who is more firm on the deen on the entire earth than Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani. And he says, after he had this dream, this is why he presented himself in the gathering of Huzur Ghaus Azam and accepted Islam at the hands of Huzur Ghaus Azam. And he says that I found Huzur Ghaus Azam, Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, to be exactly as he was described to me. Subhanallah. So this is just one example of how people used to accept Islam at the hands of Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala, and just by seeing his splendor, just by seeing his character, just by seeing his conduct. And this was his shan, that even the Anbiya Ikram acknowledged to people his maqam. And in this case, we can see that even Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam showed him direction to Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani in order to accept Islam. So such is the maqam of Huzur Ghaus Azam, and such was his status in terms of his immense knowledge in terms of the Sharia, his immense knowledge about Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So this is what we find in terms of the gatherings of Huzur Ghaus Azam. This is how he dispensed knowledge. This is how he spread the message of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. He spent his first half of his life seeking knowledge, and thereafter he spent his life dispensing that knowledge. And just for one lesson for us to learn from his gatherings, his discourses, and in one of his discourses he mentions about loving for the sake of Allah and hating for the sake of Allah. Today we have people that say that we must love everyone and hate no one. And this is in contrary to the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, in contrary to the teachings of the Holy Quran, and contrary to the teachings of the awliya Allah and the Imam of the awliya Allah, Huzur Ghaus Azam radiallahu ta'ala an. So we should refrain from following our own whims and fancies, and following those things that people claim that certain awliya Allah mention, but they take these things out of context and present it to the people. Because remember, Huzur Ghaus Azam is the Imam of all of the awliya Allah. Every wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bowed down their heads to Huzur Ghaus Azam and acknowledged when he mentioned Qadami hadhihi ala raqabati kulli waliyillah, that this foot of mine is on the neck of every wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So every one of them would always conform to what he mentions, and whatever he mentions always conforms to the Holy Quran and the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And Huzur Ghaus Azam himself mentions that if a person has any love for any person, then he needs to measure that with the two yardsticks. And he mentioned that the yardstick is the Holy Quran and the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And he says, if you find that your love is in accordance with his conduct, is in accordance with the Holy Quran and the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, then your love for him is justified and you should continue loving him. But if you find that when you measure him against the Holy Quran and the Hadith, you find that he is going against the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith, then your love is out of your own nafs and your own desires. You are loving him not for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, because we are told to love for the sake of Allah and hate for the sake of Allah. Al-hubbu fillah wal-bughzu fillah. So we cannot love for our own desire. If we love someone, it must be for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And similarly, he says, if you hate someone, then measure his conduct in accordance with the Quran and the Hadith. If you find that you hate him, but his actions it conforms to the principles of the Quran and the Hadith, then he says, then know that you hate him because of your own desires, and this is against the teachings of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. You need to adjust your heart so that even though you have something personal against the person, but you still need to love him for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. But if you find that his conduct is opposed to the Holy Quran and the Hadith, then your hatred for that person would be justified. And this is why we find in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, you would find that the Sahaba Ikram, they would be willing to kill their own sons, kill their own children, kill their own family members. Why? Even though they were their own family members, and one naturally loves one's family members, but they hated them for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, because they were the enemies of Allah and His Rasul. Similarly, in this day and age, we have bad mazhabs, we have people that insult Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, people that insult the Sahaba Ikram, people that insult the Ahl Bayt. And we have to, for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of our own nafs, but for the sake of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, it is incumbent for us to hate these personalities and to stay away from them to safeguard our own iman. The way Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, Sahaba Ikram, safeguarded their own iman by staying away from those personalities who are hostile towards Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala wasallam and the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is an important lesson we learn from one of the discourses of Huzur Ghusi Azam, that we need to love for the sake of Allah and we need to hate for the sake of Allah. There is no such thing as loving everyone and hating no one. That hating no one falls within the diagram, within the means of Islam, within when you're talking about loving for loving everyone, then that should be within Islam itself and with regard to the Muslims itself. So we should not hate any Sunni Sahihul Aqidah Muslim. Any person who has true love for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, we should not hate such a person. Even if we have personal issues and personal disagreements, we should put those personal disagreements, and in our hearts we should have love for such people. And even if people are our own family members, but they are hostile towards Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam, they insult Huzur al-Islam, they insult the Sahaba Ikram, or they insult the Ahl Bayt, then we need to cut off ties with them, even though they are our family members, because these are the teachings of Huzur Ghusi Azam, these are the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam and the Sahaba Ikram. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the tawfiq and the hidayat to increase our knowledge of Huzur Ghusi Azam, to increase our knowledge of the Sahaba Ikram, and to practice upon the teachings of the awliya Allah and the Sahaba Ikram and Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المؤمنين والمؤمنات إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. جزاكم الله.
Lana, because Palestine is going through so much, we're ending all our classes with a dua for them. Just ask Maulana to make a final dua for the people of Palestine, inshallah.
اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد معين الجود والكرم وآله وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر المسلمين في فلسطين. اللهم انصر الإخوان في فلسطين. اللهم انصر المجاهدين في فلسطين. يا رسول الله انظر حالنا، يا حبيب الله اسمع قالنا، إننا في بحر حم مغرق، خذ يدي سهل لنا إشكالنا. اللهم ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين وانصرنا على القوم المنافقين وانصرنا على القوم الظالمين. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبارك وسلم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah to Maulana again. Jazakallah to all the participants. Like Maulana stressed about the importance of knowledge. Inshallah, we've got a few other plans that are coming forth soon for the 2024 year. We'll keep you all posted. Jazakallah to Maulana again and everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.